everything I've done since Kirkland is because of Kirkland, because I wasn't afraid of something that was new, that didn't have rules or have boundaries.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, a show that explores the journeys of some of the most interesting members of the Hamilton College community. This week's guest is Christie Vilsack, Kirkland class of 1972. All right, first things first this week, a big congratulations to Joe Gilbert, class of 1987, who is now a Super Bowl champion. Coach Gilbert is the offensive line coach for the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So congratulations to Coach. And if you're thinking, hey, Dave, it would be interesting to have a Super Bowl champion on your show, well, you're right. It would be a treat to have a Super Bowl champion on this show. So stay tuned. Maybe that's going to happen soon. And speaking of treats, we got a great one this week. Christie Vilsack, a member of the Kirkland class of 1972, the inaugural class. Christie is an educator. She was the First Lady of Iowa for 8 years when her husband, Tom Vilsack, from the Hamilton class of 1972, served as the governor of Iowa. She served in the Obama administration as a senior advisor for USAID, again focusing on education. And you'll hear that commitment to education come through in much of this conversation. It was really interesting to me to hear Christie's firsthand account of what the experience was like attending Kirkland and having a hand in really what was its creation. I'm admittedly woefully ignorant about much of the history of Kirkland College, and it was great to start to rectify that in hearing Phyllis Breland's experience at Kirkland at the end of its existence. And this week it was great to get some insight from Christie on the beginning of Kirkland. I hope to continue to have conversations with women from Kirkland because it's obvious, and you hear it from Christie in this conversation, much of what that school stood for and was about lives on in the Hamilton of today. So I hope you enjoy hearing from a member of the first graduating class of Kirkland and a woman who's gone on to do some incredible things and have some incredible experiences. So here is Christie Vilsack, Kirkland class of 1972.
Usually I'm the one who has messed up a Zoom in some way, so
Well, I appreciate your patience on that.
we got it done.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine.
Good.
I am immobilized. I had surgery on my shoulder 3 weeks ago, and so there are things I can't do, but most of the things I can do. I can't drive, which is really irritating, and I can type a little bit now, so
Okay.
getting better.
Well, as someone who lives his life as a lefty, I understand your frustration with being a lefty. It's
I have a granddaughter next door who's a lefty, so she's been giving me lessons.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you for doing this. I very much appreciate it. I've talked to one Kirkland student so far, but not a Kirkland graduate.
Wow.
I talked to Phyllis Breland, who started as a Kirkland student and then was there for the transition. But I've very much been wanting to speak to more Kirkland students and Kirkland grads. So
you can see my Kirkland construction helmet hanging on the wall right above my diploma behind me. I've got my honorary degree from Hamilton, which I can see here. You can't see it, but it's right in front of me here. So I've been all in for many, many years.
that's great. How does one go from Iowa to Clinton, New York?
Well, this would have been in the 60s. My older brother, there's a small college in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, town of 8,000 people, where I grew up and also where I've lived a good part of my life. And so there were professors at Iowa Wesleyan who had graduated from Williams. And so they convinced my mother, most kids from Mount Pleasant went to state schools, but they convinced my mother that my brother should go to Williams College, which he did. So he's 4 years older. And President Chandler was a professor at Williams when the transition happened, when he came to become the president of Hamilton.
Mhm.
So my brother read in the student newspaper that Hamilton was creating this new college for women. I had decided I was going to go to an Eastern women's college. So I had gone out and stayed with my brother at Williams, and I had traveled all over in his little Volkswagen to have interviews at various colleges in 1967, I guess, early in 67. But when he heard about Kirkland, he said, "You always wanted to be Laura Ingalls Wilder out on the prairie, and you didn't get to do that." So he said, "Maybe you should go to a college that doesn't exist." So I got on a plane and flew out to Clinton in November of 1967, had my interview. There was a simulated dorm room right across from Dunham, so I could see what the college wasn't there yet. It was, you could see the place where it was going to be, but it wasn't there. I had a great interview with Channing Richardson's wife, Mrs. Richardson. I'll think of her name in a few minutes. So the person who would normally have interviewed me wasn't there. But I had a great interview with her, and I decided that day that I wanted to go to college there. Part of it was I was staying at Bristol overnight. I woke up, it had snowed on campus. It was beautiful, and the doors to the chapel flew open because at that time students had to go to chapel, and all these guys poured out, and I thought, well, this isn't all that bad. I'll be in the middle of nowhere, but so that was my decision, and I went home, and I applied early decision, and within a week I knew where I was going to college.
Wow.
And I have never ever for even 1 minute regretted making that decision.
That's great. What you mentioned, knowing you wanted to go to an Eastern women's college, what was driving that decision?
Well, I grew up in a small Midwestern town. I loved every minute of that also, but I wanted to get as far away from there as possible. I had been a foreign exchange student in South America the summer before my senior year in Santiago, Chile. And my dad had told me that it's great to grow up in a small town in Iowa, but you have to get out and go see the rest of the world. So I was a foreign exchange student. And then I knew that I was going to go to college someplace else. And by that time, my parents had dragged us on family vacations in the car all over the United States. And so I'd been almost every state in the country. So I was just really interested in, and I also felt very strongly, I'm a social person. So I loved high school life, but I also am a smart person. And I saw a bigger picture of the world, having been a foreign exchange student. So I wanted to be in a situation where I could be smart and not have to worry about it. And I was really interested in being with a bunch of really smart, interesting, dedicated women. And I loved the idea that there weren't going to be grades because I'm self-motivated. I've been an educator for 50 years and I just love education, and Kirkland was the perfect place for me because education wasn't just in the classroom. It was happening everywhere, all over the place. And so I got to help. I served on a board of trustees when I was 19 years old as a trustee. I helped pick the faculty. We had ad hoc meetings over and over every day, trying to figure out the rules for the college and how we would govern ourselves. And we were really involved with the faculty who were there, and we helped choose the faculty who came.
Wow.
We could create our own classes. I had some independent studies with professors through the years. And then one of the first things I did, because I wanted to become a writer of children's books, is that I made the acquaintance of Natalie Babbitt, who at that time was well into her career as a children's book illustrator and author, and created an independent study that lasted for 4 years and actually became a class and involved a lot of other students at Hamilton and Kirkland who went on to become writers. So, it was just this really innovative startup. And I really think everything I've done since Kirkland is because of Kirkland, because I wasn't afraid of something that was new, that didn't have rules or have boundaries. And the job I'm doing for CSU, for Colorado State University right now, is helping to start a new kind of campus and helping develop their K-12 program at this amazing campus in downtown Denver where they're just breaking ground and building buildings. And so I feel like I'm right back where I started from, creating something from scratch.
Yeah.
That's that kind of startup mentality, I guess, is something that drew me to Kirkland and Hamilton at that time, the coordination. And it's just been a part of most everything I've done since.
It's interesting that the students had such a hand in shaping the college. It must
Right.
have created immense sense of pride and ownership in your time there.
Definitely. There were only 172 of us.
Right.
And so, and we were just freshmen. So there were no upperclassmen.
Right.
We've always been, that I don't know, maybe because we never had upperclassmen, we were upperclassmen for 4 years, and had certainly a sense of pride, and maybe a little more than that too. We thought we were pretty special,
Mm-hmm.
and probably still do. But it was quite an experiment in education, and very foresightful on the part of the Hamilton trustees, because right now we're going through this huge change in education in this country because of COVID, and just because we're doing education differently. And I can see now that I serve on a board of trustees of a small college here in Iowa, and I can look back and see that one of the things that happened at Kirkland and Hamilton is that they had the foresight to see that they had to change,
Mm-hmm.
or they wouldn't continue probably to exist. And of course, the bottom fell out of higher education, which is what did Kirkland in the end, and forced the combining of the two colleges. But really, in choosing to start Kirkland, the trustees were thinking more broadly, as they should have been, that they needed something else there. And their idea was to create a cluster of colleges like the Pomona colleges in Southern California.
Right.
So Kirkland was the first, but they were thinking about other kinds of colleges like a language school and other kinds of colleges in this cluster in this rural area of New York. And of course, that didn't all materialize. And eventually Hamilton and Kirkland combined into Hamilton, and changed into a co-ed school. But that kernel, that apple seed that got planted there, still, I think, has really influenced the kind of education you get at Kirkland. And because our son Jess went to Kirkland, went to Hamilton, even his freshman year, I could see a lot of Kirkland is still there, embodied in the freshman experience.
Like what?
Well, he chose to go into a special dorm where they focused on, I think the theme that year, that would have been 1996, the fall of 96. He was in North, I think. But anyway, everybody in the dorm it was a theme, and they focused on the theme as a dorm, and did a lot of outside of class. They took classes around the theme, which I believe had to do with the slave trade. And it was cross-curricular. So they were reading, in the lit classes, they were reading novels. In the social studies classes, they were doing other kinds of reading and study around that. And I found that just really interesting. And of course, these were writing intensive classes also, which Hamilton is well known for. And
sure.
I don't think he has regretted for a minute going to Hamilton either. But the other thing is that, that for me, because I met my husband my first month at Kirkland, and he was in the corresponding class at Hamilton, the class of 72, that sort of influenced our lives. But our son Jess was the first offspring of a Hamilton Kirkland, of the charter class and that same class at Hamilton.
True representation of the merger.
Yeah, so he was the first Hamilton grad. There were others, there were a couple other people who married who might have been seniors, or somebody who graduated in another class at Kirkland after me. But we were the two from that charter class and the corresponding class at Hamilton. So
I was going to ask you about, as a student heavily involved in the creation of the school, what the experience was like living near and integrating with the existing college with Hamilton.
Yeah, I found it really energizing because Hamilton was more traditional, and so I took classes both places.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I was maybe a little atypical. I think there were a lot of students at Kirkland I felt as comfortable at Hamilton as I did at Kirkland always. And I don't know that was always the case for my classmates. It was a wonderful experience for me coming from, a picket fence kind of middle of the road town in Iowa to Kirkland was every person was a story as far as I was concerned. And that's probably true anytime anybody goes to college. But this was the 60s that, it was 1967 or 68. And so it was the women's movement. It was the civil rights movement. It was the Vietnam War was on. My classmates went to the Vietnam War, right? And
Right.
I went to college in upstate New York. So it was a huge change for me, and everybody was different. And I just soaked it all up, and but everybody was different. I will be talking to some of my classmates on Wednesday morning, and my roommate, after she saw the clothes that I brought to college and met me for the first time, told her parents to take her home. And she informed me that she wouldn't be spending very much time with me. But she, we've celebrated our 40th, 50th, 60th, and when we get out of COVID, we'll get together for our 70th, which we didn't get to celebrate together this year. But we've been friends for over 50 years. We were probably more alike than we thought we were at the time, but everything about Kirkland and Hamilton was an education for me because it was also different from anything I'd ever experienced before. So I didn't feel any animosity. In fact, one of the reasons I came there was because there were 800 men across the road, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the fraternities. I enjoyed the whole thing. I didn't want to go to a college with sororities. It's one of the reasons I didn't go to a state school. That wasn't what I was interested in, but I enjoyed that. I enjoyed everything that was happening over on the Hamilton campus. And I've been living with this preppy. I didn't know what a preppy was. He's downstairs. He gets up every morning, even during COVID, and puts on his navy blue blazer and, his tasseled loafers and his button-down shirt and goes downstairs. So every once in a while, I get him a tie that's a little, out of his comfort zone. But
very funny. A true Hamilton man.
But I didn't know what that was. I'd never met anybody like him before.
Very funny.
For almost 50 years. So.
I had read something about you that talked about your interest in politics at a young age prior to going to Kirkland. And then you mentioned the time in which you were there, which was a progressive time and, in some cases radical time. Did that fan the flames of your political interests being at Kirkland?
Well, I grew up in a really conservative area in Iowa. It still is. But my dad took me to meet Harry Truman when I was 4 years old. He had just finished his presidency, had come back to Missouri. My mother was Missourian, and so I met him and refused to shake his hand when I was 4 years old because they tell you not to shake strangers' hands, and then they put me in front of this guy, and he gave me a pen, which I have. Oh, I guess it's downstairs now, but usually it's been sitting on my desk that Harry Truman gave me that said, I swiped this pen from Harry Truman when I was 4. I refused to shake his hand, so he bribed me and he gave me this pen and I shook his hand, and it's now framed downstairs. But that my dad said he wanted to make sure that I knew I was a Democrat early so that those Republicans in Southeast Iowa couldn't switch me over. So I grew up in a family that was political in a place where most everybody else, if I didn't have Republican friends in the town where I grew up, I wouldn't have any friends, right? That's still the case. So you just learn to get along. It's harder now, but you just work at it. So I was very involved in the Kennedy campaign when I was 10. So I had Kennedy Johnson stickers all over my bicycle, and then started the Young Democrats Club in my high school. There were only 7 of us when I was in high school. So when I was in college at Kirkland, when this young man approached me in the dining hall at Commons, because we had to eat there the first year. We didn't have our dining room. We only had 3 dormitories. We didn't have anything else. So we didn't have any place to eat. So we had to eat with the guys over on the Hamilton campus. And so as he would tell you the story differently, but you're talking to me, so you get my version.
It's the one I want.
So I'm putting my tray away after dinner, and this guy walks up to me, and he just stood there, and and now I realize he couldn't think of what he was going to say, but he finally said, "So who are you going to support in the election? Humphrey or Nixon?" That was his pickup line. And I looked at him and I said, "Humphrey, of course." It was an election year. It was 1968. And then he knew he could proceed because he knew because he had grown up, Bobby Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so he was also, we didn't know this at the time, but he was also politically involved. So his pickup line worked, and he said he never needed to use another one. So because we were together since then, so we were both interested in politics, and of course there was a lot of politics happening even on the Hamilton campus in the 60s. As our sophomore year, we were all sent home early because the Kent State killings happened, and they closed down the college and sent us all home. So we didn't have exams or, didn't finish our classes that spring. So there was a lot of politics happening, and we weren't in college. We were not actively involved in political stuff, but as soon as we voted for the first time in New York, because we lived in Richfield Springs while Tom was going to law school and I was teaching, and then we went back to my hometown, and then we were involved in Democratic politics. And eventually, if you told me then, I told him, I said, "You can't run for office here. You're not a Methodist. You're not a Republican, and you weren't born here, so forget it." And that was the one time he didn't pay any attention to me, and ended up being mayor and a state senator and governor and now secretary. So anyway, so
was that coming out of school? Was a life in politics the vision?
Oh no, I'm a teacher. He's a small town lawyer.
Sure.
We were helping other people get. So when we went to back home to my little town, there were still only a handful of Democrats, and so we helped elect a Democrat for the first time to the County Board of Supervisors. And at that time, and then in 1987, of course, the caucuses started with Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter was our first presidential candidate that we supported and stood for in the caucus. And then Joe Biden came to town in 1986, and we told him that we would travel the state of Iowa talking to high school students on his behalf. And he came to our house, and we did an event for him. And I met Jill, and we created Teachers for Biden, and then they dropped out of the race. So we didn't have a candidate. We were just devastated. And so we've known them, and we finally helped them get elected. And it took a while, 33 years. So we were doing that. So we've been involved in every caucus, but Tom had not run for office yet when Joe Biden and Jill were there. He ran for office because after we didn't have a candidate, our mayor was murdered that year in this little town. A man was upset over his sewer being backed up. So he walked into the city council chambers and murdered our mayor. And so the father of the murdered mayor came to Tom and said he thought he should run for mayor. He was just a young guy and had gotten some attention in the community for some of the volunteer activities he'd done. So he did, and he won, which was surprising because it's not a political, mayor's races aren't political in Iowa. So people voted for him. So that was the beginning. So he actually ran for office because what we'd been telling these high school students is the price you pay for not getting involved in politics is that you end up being governed by people less qualified than you. And so when Joe Biden dropped out and we didn't have a candidate, Tom decided to run for mayor. So it was very cool because when he was sworn in as the Secretary of Agriculture in 2008 for President Obama, Joe Biden swore him in. So he was the vice president, and he came over and swore him in. And then President Obama came in and swore him in too, but Joe swore him in first. So that was kind of cool because it was through that presidential campaign that we really got involved in presidential politics. And then Tom ran for president himself the next time. So, so we've sort of done all of those things, but it all goes back to my husband coming up to me in the dinner line at Commons and saying, "Who are you going to support in the election?"
I imagine his running for office, and I know you too have run for office, but his running for office and his time in office has an impact on you, and you've been able to continue a career in education, but then also have used that as, your role in whatever office he's held, to push that platform as well.
Sure. I guess I'm versatile in that I loved being the first lady of Iowa. It was great. It gave me a chance to really highlight issues that I cared about, in terms of education and reading, and also and I had run for office when I was in high school. So I was, I had run for office, and I was always interested in politics. It wasn't practical for two people to run for office, right? We had children, and we were living a very normal life for 20 years, getting up and going to work every day and raising our kids. And they were going off to college. Jess was already in Hamilton when Tom ran for governor, and Doug was getting ready to go to college. So nobody cared who their dad was. Doug went to college in Colorado, and Jess was in New York. So they just were out of it. So they didn't have to be involved in all that stuff. But we had a great time in the 8 years that Tom was governor, and I think we transformed Iowa. And but then John Kerry asked if I would speak on his behalf at the convention in 2004, because I had endorsed his campaign. Tom didn't endorse when he was governor. He wanted it to be an even playing field, but I wasn't adverse to endorsing. And so I endorsed John Kerry. He asked me to speak at the convention. And ironically, Tom says I have the great trivia question. It's who spoke right before Barack Obama at the 2004 convention? It was me. So anyway, but
you paved the way. You paved the way.
Yeah, as scared as I was to get up there in front of all those people, because I am not unlike my husband, who loves to speak in front of people. I'm a writer, not a speaker, but I have become one out of necessity. But I stood up there in front of all those people, and in front of all the people on TV and all the people in the convention hall, and spoke my piece. And I realized after that, and the reaction that I got from it, that I had my own following in Iowa that I didn't know about. So that eventually led me to realize that I could run for Congress, which I did in 2008.
Yep.
And so when that didn't work out, I ran against Steve King, who is sort of a precursor to Donald Trump, actually. He's been in the news a lot the last week because he was stripped of his committee assignments for his racist comments. And because I had traveled all over the state, I thought I might have a chance of beating a 5-term incumbent congressman. But that didn't work out. But so after the election, when Barack Obama was elected again, then we were in our apartment. Tom was secretary. We were in our apartment in Washington, and my phone rang in my purse, and I was rummaging through my purse and finally got it. And when I answered it, the voice said, "This is Air Force One. Would you please hold for the President of the United States?" And the president got on and asked if I would join his administration. That would have been for the second term. And I chose, as an educator, I thought it would be fun. Instead of going to the education department, where I probably should have gone, I decided to go to USAID as a senior advisor for education. So I spent that 4 years, the second 4 years of the Obama administration, traveling the world to places other people don't want to go: Afghanistan and Pakistan, many of the sub-Saharan African countries where the U.S. has education programs. Taking a look at those programs, talking about them, making sure that I helped with Michelle Obama's Let Girls Learn program, which was focused on making sure girls got an education in developing countries around the world, and focusing on reading for the 250 million kids who haven't gotten a chance to read. So that again was an amazing educational experience. So I've just been a student. I've been a teacher all my life, and I guess I did that because if I'm a teacher, I can just keep learning, right? And that all goes back to Kirkland and Hamilton, where that was an ethic, the ethic of everything is a chance to learn. But those friendships from those years at Hamilton and Kirkland, both the men and the women, have remained all these years. So we have really strong friendships that we continue from our years on the Hill. And then I got a job in the school where I did my student teaching. So there was no teaching. There was no education department at Kirkland. So I got my education credits at Hamilton. I was an English major.
Mm-hmm.
So at Kirkland, but I was able to, and the dean, because there wasn't any way for me to get an education degree at Hamilton, they went through all my classes at Kirkland, and I did my student teaching at Hamilton, and they sort of cobbled together an education so I could get certified in the state of New York.
Wow.
Because I didn't have I didn't have grades. I didn't have the traditional classes.
Right.
But I did my student teaching in Waterville through Hamilton, and then I got a job there for 3 years. So I made $7,000 a year and helped put my husband through law school at Albany Law School. Huh. So Dean Tolles was really instrumental in both of us in making sure Tom got into law school and helping me get a teaching degree in New York so I could support him while he went to law school. So I lived in the town of Clinton that first year after graduation, and then commuted to Waterville every day to teach school there. Wow. So I stayed an extra year in the community, and some of my other friends did too. My good friend, my roommate, who I referred to earlier, stayed and worked in the admissions department for a year. So I had friends still in that area. So I had an extra year there, and then made friends in the community. So some of our best friends live in Clinton. So we come back to Clinton often, not just for the college, which of course we do,
sure,
but we also come back because we have friends in Clinton who are not connected with the college at all, and friends in Waterville. So yeah, so we try to get back there about once a year for one reason or another.
That's great. You talked about education, and I watched. I think it was a TEDx talk you gave about I think the work in Malawi.
Yeah, Mrs. Allen.
Yes, wonderful talk. So I don't want to hear this business that you're not a good public speaker. But the point that was made there that I think can often get lost when talking about the importance of education, right? I think in this country, you think about, well, if you don't have an education, you don't get a good job and you're not as successful. But the points you made there at the end about the little girl and
yes.
You said, and they said she's going to go be a farmer, but because she can read, or she'll be able to read, right, she'll be a better farmer. And right, then that has impact just on the health of everyone in the community.
Right.
And it has impact on the population because she's going to raise her kids to be she's going to space out how she has kids. She's going to be smarter about raising a family. The impact of education and literacy often gets lost in just thinking about, it's about, making kids get better jobs, but it's so much more than that.
Oh, it is. And I used to say to the people in my state, because we send more kids to the military than most any state from Iowa. Mm-hmm. They grow up with this sense of public service, and they may not become politicians, but they go into the military. And I would say to them, because many of them went to Afghanistan, including my nephew Sam, who was in the Marines in Afghanistan. And I'd say to them, look, because you went there, because of what you did, regardless of the politics of it, there are 8 million more kids in school in Afghanistan, and 2/3 of them are girls. And that will transform that country in ways that most of us can't even imagine, because of what I said about the little girl named Martha in Malawi. You teach a child to read, especially a girl. If you teach a girl to read, even if she doesn't get a whole education, if she knows how to read, she's going to make sure her own children learn to read. She's going to be able to read the healthcare information. She'll make her own choices about how many children she has. She will teach other people to read. She will be a leader in her community, and that will change. And we have the data to show this, change the gross national product of her country. And if you look at the countries that don't educate girls, you'll see that the gross national product is much lower than the countries where people are now trying to make sure that girls get an education. So it makes a huge difference. And that was what that was about. And I tried to make the connection, because what I realized, and my grandmother got to go to college, and this is important to the Kirkland story and Hamilton story. My grandmother's father, my great-grandfather, believed in education, and they lived out on the prairie here in Iowa. She lived at little Milton, Iowa, has a couple hundred people still left in it. But my great-grandfather believed in education. And so he made sure that his daughter got an education, and he sent her to college for a year. At the college where I now serve on the board of trustees, she got to go to college for a year. In 1900, that was really rare in this country for a girl in a rural area to get to go to college. And so because she got to go for a year and she studied piano, and Iowa Wesleyan is the oldest college west of the Mississippi, the oldest coeducational college still in west of the Mississippi. She went there for a year, and then she had my dad, and she also had two daughters, and her two daughters got 2 years of a college education, right, in the next generation. My dad, whose sisters taught school so he could go to college at the same place, made sure that I got to go to Kirkland and paid for my college education for 4 years. And my mom had just died of cancer when I was getting ready to go to college. And I live in a small town in Iowa, and many of my friends got married before they graduated from high school. In the 1960s, girls were still expected to get married, especially if they were pregnant. And so getting out of the community and having the opportunity for a 4-year college education at a college like Hamilton and Kirkland was pretty unique for somebody. And I had a younger brother when my mom died. She died right before I graduated from high school. So she made my dad promise that he would make sure that I got to continue to go to college, that he didn't keep me home to take care of my younger brother. So you can see the effect of being able to give a girl. And now I've got granddaughters. I don't have daughters, but my two daughters-in-law both have PhDs, and I'm quite sure my 3 granddaughters will also. So you can see the effects even in this country. So I try to help people understand in this education thing and why we spend money in other countries like Malawi or Ethiopia or Pakistan or Afghanistan. People like Malala, who I had the opportunity to meet, we share a birthday, that it really is truly important. And it still is in this country. Sure. If you give a girl an education in this country, and there are places in this country that remind me a lot of the countries, the developing countries that I went to. If we can guarantee a public education for kids, boys or girls, then that's just such a huge step. So that's been my whole life. And again, it all started at Kirkland and Hamilton, both.
Are you optimistic that the new administration will make education more of a priority than it's been?
Well, I know it will. The president asked me to serve on Tom was on the platform committee, but I served on his education task force that brought all the parts of our party together to create the education platform.
Good.
So there were people from the Bernie Sanders campaign and people from the Elizabeth Warren campaign, and there were Biden people. There were 8 of us, actually. And we, for a month last June, hammered out the details of the Biden education plan. And, one of the reasons I was on there is because of certainly my background in education, but Dr. Biden is a teacher, and we both teach the same thing, actually. She teaches at a community college, and I teach at a college that pretty much serves those same kinds of students. But it's a 4-year college, but it's college freshman English, what everybody has to take. And we traveled around the state last year, and she was reading her students' essays as she was traveling along in the bus, and we would have conversations about that. So she knows of my commitment to transforming the college education experience in a lot of colleges right now. And they knew that I had experience internationally. They knew that I had the K-12 experience. So they asked me to serve on the committee. And so I was really honored to be able to do that. So I can guarantee you that I know the president won't, he often jokes about his commitment to education, but that he feels very, very responsible to Jill Biden to make sure that those priorities are looked into. And she's going to be the first lady to continue to teach. So I'm excited about that too. I think that'll do a lot for teachers.
More work from you with this administration?
No, I told them, they're getting Tom. And I still have a job that will end with Colorado State in June, but we have grandkids in Colorado. We have grandkids here next door, a couple of new ones, new little girls, one who's 4 months old, and next door one who's a year old. And so I'm going to be the floater now. I'm going to be moving between DC, Denver, and Des Moines. So home is here. We have a little apartment in Arlington, Virginia, which is where it's going to be our Washington headquarters. And really for right now, I mean, Tom's downstairs working now. He's on the phone all day with his staff who are all over the country. And even once the impeachment proceedings are done and hopefully he gets confirmed in another week or so, he still will probably be operating the department from here because most people aren't working in the departments. They're not, they're all working remotely until we get the pandemic under control.
Yeah.
So he's still here, which is great because I'm immobilized and he's cooking dinner and, he's running the Department of Agriculture and organizing for hopefully for his tenure there. But he's also taking care of me because I can't drive and, I can't chop up stuff for a salad or, so anyway. So he's my personal trainer and my caretaker here as I'm recuperating from shoulder surgery.
And both jobs are equally important.
Yes, absolutely. Definitely. Absolutely. He's been taking care of me for a long time. We've been taking care of each other, but I was very, very fortunate to have met him way back when.
So as you think back on your time at Kirkland and the incredible career and journey you've had since, is there anything you wish you had known when you were starting out in Clinton, New York?
No, I wouldn't have done anything differently, except, one of the things I wish that I had taken Mr. Barrett's, I don't know when you were there, but I wish I had taken Mr. Barrett's Shakespeare class. And he was probably one of the best professors in the country. And I was an English major and I took most of my English classes at Kirkland. And I don't regret that, but I do wish that I'd had his Shakespeare class. I think Tom and we've been doing great courses. So we have a glass of wine at night. And so we did a Shakespeare class together, actually, earlier this year when we realized we were going to be stuck here in this house for a year without going anywhere.
How are those great courses?
They're wonderful. We just did one on the Beatles also, which was kind of fascinating. That was great. But, one of the things I always tell students, because I have a lot of contact with them, and I have contact with Kirkland because my family, they started an internship in my name because there are a lot of students who want to do internships. And especially this year with COVID, they had to do them remotely. But they sometimes get a great internship, but they don't have the resources to go to New York, for instance, to live for 3 months. Or it's maybe an unpaid internship. And so they don't get to have a job to help pay for it. So my internship allows them that extra money that helps them travel. Like if they live in Iowa or some remote place and they want to do an internship someplace and they need money to live in Washington, D.C., which is really expensive for students if they have unpaid internships, then every year I have a student who gets that money to go do a cool internship someplace. So I usually meet those students virtually, or I'm on campus once got to meet one. And so I continue to keep track of them to see how they're doing. But I always, no matter who the student is, it's always one of the most important things I think for any young person, no matter who they are or where they're going to college, is just to get out of their comfort zone and go someplace different. For my dad, it was the Navy, and then he encouraged me to go to college someplace out of Iowa and become a foreign exchange student. So getting out of your country, getting out of your comfort zone, spending some time in somebody else's shoes. Right now in this country, nothing is more important than kids getting out of their zip codes.
Right.
And going someplace and doing something different and meeting other kinds of people, because that the only way we're going to be able to solve the problems we have in this country right now is if we continue to listen to people. And in that regard, I've been fortunate because I was brought up to spend time with people who are different from me. And I was gonna
ask you about that. Is your experience being a Democrat and growing up where you did, understanding the current environment? What lessons can we learn from someone like you who's existed, with people who are different or have different beliefs?
Well, I get sometimes testy when people start disparaging people and talking down about people, even if they're doing it about the people in my state. right now who I may not agree with, but they're still good, decent people out there. And you can't just lump people together and disparage them. You have to continue to listen to people and understand and walk a mile in their shoes. So that's just always been the way it is for me. When you grow up in a small town, there's not a lot of, often not a lot of racial diversity, but there's a lot of economic diversity. And so, it's just, it's continuing to talk to people and listening to them and trying to understand. And so I had to do that. I was the first lady of Iowa. I wasn't just the first lady of Iowa for the Democrats. Traveled all over the state, and I didn't care. In a public library, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. You're talking about education, which is important to all of us. So that's just always been the way it is with me. And, in the Department of Agriculture, it's, Tom couldn't do his job, and I've helped in that respect too. If you're talking about issues of food, or you're talking about issues of nutrition, you're talking about all issues of land and the environment, these are issues we all care about. So you just find ways and venues to continue to talk to people. And I think more of that would stand us in good stead. And partly you have to start early with kids and make sure that they realize that they have to go someplace where they're uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable at Kirkland a good part of the time because I was completely out of my comfort zone for 4 years. And I have continued to put myself in places that make me uncomfortable. As I said, I'm not by nature a public speaker. I'm nervous about talking in front of people. And but you just continue to challenge yourself and put yourself in positions that help you grow. My father always talked about character building experiences, and I've had a lifetime of character building experiences. And that just for students, I think that's the most important thing, is to keep putting yourself into situations, not dangerous situations necessarily, but challenging situations, so that you can always continue to grow.
All right, that's Christie Vilsack, Kirkland class of 1972. Man, can you imagine going to visit a school and the school doesn't exist yet? It's like buying a home in a new development and having to go see the model home and envisioning what yours is going to look like after it's built. We've talked on this show in the past about the arms race that seems to exist amongst colleges and having to have the best new facilities and shiny new buildings. And here were students committing to a school that wasn't finished. In fact, they had played a significant role when they got there in shaping what the school looked like. What an incredible experience. And I encourage you to check out that TEDx talk we discussed. I'll put the link in the show notes. I'm sure those of you that work in education will say, yeah, well, no duh. But it helped broaden my view of the importance of literacy and education. And it's good to know someone like that is playing an active role in helping to shape what our nation's policy on education will look like. My thanks to Christie Vilsack for joining this week. Great conversation. And best of luck to her husband, Tom Vilsack. Looks like the vote for his confirmation as Secretary of Agriculture will be on February 23rd. And best wishes to Christie on her continued recovery from shoulder surgery. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. HadIKnown.buzzsprout.com. Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on this show. And once again, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week.
Had I Known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.